Welcome to church, everybody. This is quite literally our last service for 2024. You made it. You survived. You survived the year. Hopefully some of you did more than survive the year, and it is our prayer that even as you end this year and go into the new year, that you'll actually experience a real sense of refreshing and replenishing and just direction from God, that you'll go into 2025 with a truckload of hope. A truckload of hope. Anybody needing some hope for the new year? I want to wrap this year up and this Christmas set of services up with focusing on how trustworthy God is. He is worthy of our trust. Whether we're conscious about it or not, we all place trust into certain things. Right now, you're trusting the chair that you're sitting on. You haven't thought about it until right now, and for some of you, that's making you anxious. But there's so many things that we just trust without even thinking about it, and in many cases, that's a good thing. Then, of course, there are other things that we very deliberately, very consciously place our trust in, and it does, and in other cases, does not deliver. Sometimes it disappoints us. Maybe this year you've placed a certain type of trust into your career choice, or maybe it was a job change or promotion, or maybe it's taking the next step in your education, or maybe it was a particular relationship. All of us put trust into things or people. And in many cases, it's appropriate, hopefully. In some cases, it's inappropriate. Sometimes we put hope into a person or into a thing, into an institution that actually, to be fair, we can only put into God. Sometimes people, without meaning to, put hope into a spouse that actually should only be put into God. Sometimes we take a good thing, a career, an opportunity, an education, a friendship, whatever, and without even meaning to, we can put the kind of trust into that person or that thing that actually only God is able to carry. And so my question for you before we go any further is just to simply consider whether what you have placed your trust in this year is worthy of trust. Is what you've placed your trust in this year worthy of trust? And just so you know, this isn't a trick question. I would imagine that in some cases the answer is yes. I've placed the appropriate amount of trust and it's worked out well. And then maybe there are some other instances where you're thinking, if I'm being honest with myself, I have been disappointed with what I've been relying on to replenish me, what I've been relying on to kind of escape some of the stress and pain in my life, what I've been relying on to numb some of the stuff that I don't want to feel. And of course the question, or the invitation rather from God, is to then shift what you're placing your trust in. Sometimes trust can disappoint us quite horribly or even embarrassingly. Some of you have been around with us since our Paddocks days when we were in the Paddock Shopping Center, and you may or may not recall that we had a bunch of plastic chairs that we would use, that we would sit on, and they worked for a while until they didn't. And if you were in the services, you might recall that out of nowhere, it sounded like gunshots going off as a chair just began to crack and then obliterate, and you just see legs in the sky. And of course, this is during a moment like this, right? Where nothing else is going on. It's not during worship. Everybody notices. Everybody turns around. And of course, it wouldn't happen to a long-serving man, but it'll happen to a visitor. Right? How many of you know my trust in those chairs was broken that day? Especially when I discovered that it had happened once or twice before when I wasn't there and nobody had told me. So now it's not just trust in the chairs, trust in the leadership. So you better believe that every single Sunday, I would personally go in, because I'm a heavier guy, I would go and sit on every chair and wiggle around and try and see if there's any vulnerability in the chairs, in the legs, and in some cases there were, so we would just throw those chairs away. We wanted to make sure that if people were going to sit on a chair, they could trust the chairs. Trust was broken for me in those chairs. Apparently it was broken for that visitor too, because I don't think she ever came back. And then, of course, you have someone else in the church that's like, oh, maybe it's a sign you need to go on a diet. Are you mad? Why would you say that to somebody? That person's no longer with us either. Anyway, sometimes the thing we place trust in It can hold the weight they're putting on. Other times, it can be disappointing. Just so you know, these chairs are strong. These are not the same chairs. You're good. You're safe. Sometimes it can be disappointing, and then there's sometimes when it can be thoroughly disorienting. Like, it's one thing to be disappointed in a chair. It can be very painful to be disappointed in a person. It can be thoroughly disorienting when what you've placed your trust in terms of religion, a relationship with God, or a way of life. And again, we all, whether we call it religion or not, whether we call it Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or whatever, regardless of what we call it, we all have a level of faith that we place in our way of life that we are hoping will lead us to the good life, which is a life of peace, joy, fulfillment, and meaning. And when that doesn't seem to deliver, it can be thoroughly disorienting. And truth be told, if you have been in a relationship with God, if you have been surrendering yourself to the Christian faith, which simply means that you've accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and you have been trying to follow Him, and you have gone through patches of doubt and mystery and suffering, and where you're trying to add up, thinking, God, why would you allow this to happen? Or why does it feel like you've been so far from me for so long, so quiet for so long? My prayers feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling. Why does it feel like my prayers for this person that I love and care for are falling on deaf ears? You don't seem to be making a difference. Whenever we are praying for or asking, trusting, hoping for things that we think are reasonable and fair, you're the victim of an injustice and you're asking God to make it right and it doesn't feel like it's going right. It is not just disappointing, it can be completely disorienting. And understandably, it can cause us to doubt God. And by the way, just so you know, I don't think God is offended or intimidated in the least when we doubt, when we struggle, when we have questions, when we feel even a sense of anger or frustration. Read through the book of Psalms, 150 chapters. 2/3 of them, arguably, scholars have suggested, are psalms of lament. In other words, there's disappointment. There's frustration. Some of the psalms start off with, God, why have you let us down? And take care of my enemies. Punch them in the face. Sort them out. Like, very real. Not stuff that we're going to sing in church. Yeah. We don't sing songs about punch them in the face, Lord. Like, we don't do that, right? But then if you keep reading, it's almost like because they're willing to be honest to begin with, because they know that God's not intimidated or offended by our honesty, it's like they come through a journey to where by the end of the psalm, you read them saying, but your love endures forever. Your faithfulness endures forever. Because there is, I believe that as we are honest with God about our disappointments, as we are honest about things that we're disillusioned about or disoriented over, I actually think that God is able to meet us in those places of honesty. And so I don't want to mess with you or disappoint you. This message isn't actually about giving you silver bullets and answers to some of the toughest questions of life. In some cases, there is perspective to be found. In other cases, I would suggest that understanding the dysfunction of humanity doesn't take away the pain that is caused by the dysfunction of humanity. And so there is nothing wrong with wanting to understand choice and consequences and all that stuff. And there are great books that have been written to help. But in my own experience, and just so you know, I'm someone that thinks through this stuff. I will wrestle over those questions. All I can tell you is that for me, what changed was not having every answer I've ever had answered. It was actually experiencing the presence of God. And when I say the presence of God, I'm not talking about a terribly emotional, overwhelming thing. I just mean just an awareness, a sense of, God, you're with me. You see me. You care. And through that experience and experiences like that, which for the most part would be gentle and subtle, and truth be told, for the most part would be very rare. Just so you know, I don't often have that visceral sense. But what it has helped me do is trust Him more. When I come out of a valley, when I come out of a season of wilderness or dryness or silence, where I feel like everything is just crickets, when I feel like nothing's making sense and there's mystery, and you come out the other side and you see God's hand and God's faithfulness and God's goodness, and even though He's not resolving some of that stuff, He's still strengthening and being present to you. That strengthens trust. He is worthy of trust. And all I want to leave you with today is that passage that Sue read a few moments ago. I want to read it from the New Living Translation because there are so many verses that we could read from, but this one in particular, I want to just kind of unpack a little bit and hope that it marinades with you for a while. As it just depicts prophetically, like it was prophesying 600 years in advance, the character that we would see in Jesus when He came to earth. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 in the New Living Translation says, "For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on His shoulders." Some have argued that another way of putting that is to say, you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. He carries the weight of the world on His shoulders. You are not made to carry every problem, every crisis, every trauma. We are exposed to 24/7 news cycles that keep informing us about but many of the terrible things that are happening around us and around the world. And the reality is our souls have never been created to carry all of that. We can't carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. In fact, sometimes carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders distracts us from carrying the weight that's right in front of us that we're supposed to be present to. Being present to the people in front of us, to the family around us, to the neighbors around us, to the people around us. We can so easily be indignant and upset and outraged by what's happening around the world, but then actually be distracted from what's in front of us. He will carry the weight of the world on His shoulders. And then I love this. These are the four characteristics that I want to sit with for a few moments. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Think about that for a moment. We have a wonderful counselor who guides us. We have a mighty God who empowers us. We have an everlasting Father who loves us and a Prince of Peace who is present in every storm. He might not remove the storm, He might not quieten every storm, but He is present to us. If we think for a moment about Him being our wonderful counselor, I think it speaks of things like offering divine wisdom, where we are needing wisdom for life, wisdom for 2025, wisdom in our relationships, wisdom in terms of what you're going to do in your career or your education or whatever the case is. We have a wonderful counselor. If you've ever been to a good counselor, to a therapist, or to someone, a life coach even, or just sitting down with a good friend where you're seeking some perspective, a lot of the time they're going to start off with just listening. Amen. This is Paul's letter to the Galatians. Galatians is a good book. What was I saying? Does anybody know? Oh, the therapist. That's right. They listen, right? They listen. They listen. Okay. So, if He's a wonderful counselor who's willing to listen, the question for us is, are we willing to talk? If Jesus invites us to speak, the part that we are responsible for is, will I talk? Will I be honest? Will I sit long enough? Will I detox from distractions long enough to actually be present and self-aware and to just be honest about what I'm feeling or thinking, what I'm grateful for, what I'm disappointed in, whatever? Will I talk? But then I think a really helpful friend, mentor, counselor, therapist, coach, whatever, will also offer some perspective, make some suggestions. And then again, the question is, will I listen? Will I obey? And truth be told, there are times, I don't know about you, but there are times in my life where if I'm really honest with myself, I actually am wasting time asking God about something because if I'm honest, I'm not actually willing to obey what he says. Am I willing to speak? Am I willing to listen? Am I willing to obey, to trust and obey? He is our mighty God. He's a wonderful counselor, but he's also our mighty God who speaks of divine power. He offers us power when we are weak, when I'm struggling with self-control, when I'm struggling with patience, when I'm struggling with generosity, when I'm struggling with loving someone that's difficult to love, when I'm struggling to be who I want to be, who I think God's called me to be. He offers us power. Philippians 2 verse 13 says that he gives us the desire and the power to do what pleases him. I need his power. I cannot overstate how the longer I live and the longer I try and love people, the more humbled I am by how much help I need from God to love well. And when I say love well, I mean not to just look the part. I know how to look loving. I know how to act loving. I'm talking about for God to help me to actually have compassion when everything in me wants aggression. I need his help. I need his power. When I'm tired and stressed and irritable, I need his power. I've long past given up just trying to be a good guy. I need to be a godly guy. I need God's help to close the gap between who I am and who he's called me to be. We need his power. And the good news is he's our mighty God. He is a mighty God. He offers us power. And then third, he's an everlasting Father. Some scholars argue that because it's referring to Jesus and not Father as in that part of the Trinity, that maybe the term Father has more meaning in terms of that of a king over a people, because they would often be referred to as like a father to their people, which of course Jesus is our king, and he is in that sense a father over us. And everlasting, referring to him being eternal, like he is over eternity. But just think about that. Think about what a healthy father connotes. Now, there are many people that have not had the example of a healthy father, and in some cases a healthy mother, but He is the essence of love. You see, if we think of him being a mighty God, but also being a father, how that connects together is that if you're a parent of a young child, you have power over that child. Some parents try and have power over teenagers and adults. That's called manipulation, just so you know. That was for free. But as a parent of a younger child, you have power. They are so dependent on you. But you don't abuse or misuse that power because you love. So because you love that child, you use that power to serve and protect and provide. When you love somebody, because I love Sue more than I've ever loved Sue, because I love my family, if I have any kind of power, I'm motivated to use it for good. When maybe you have some power or agency in a situation and you are exposed to someone that has less power and less agency, if you are motivated by love, you're going to use power to serve, to protect, to empower, to help. He is a good father. He is our everlasting Father. This might sound like a weird scripture to use on Christmas because normally this would fit more into Easter. But I'm so impacted as I'm reminded of what Jesus did for us at the cross, which again is, in my opinion, the strongest reflection of his love for us. 1 Peter 2 verse 24, which is a little book towards the end of the Bible, towards the end of the New Testament, says he personally carried our sins, referring to Jesus, in his body on the cross, so that we can be dead to sin and live for what is right. But then this is the part that I want you to pay attention to. By his wounds, you are healed. That is quoting a passage that was also prophesied in the same book that we read from earlier, Isaiah, which is in the Old Testament. 53 verse 5, it says, but he, again referring to Jesus, was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed, or the NIV says, by his wounds we are healed. Now, that might not mean a great deal to you, but why it struck me again recently is because in my experience so far with Christians and churches over a lifetime, I have only ever heard that passage quoted when it comes to physical healing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Jesus is able to heal us physically. But I think that it's an incorrect, or at least an incomplete understanding of that passage. Because not every Christian is guaranteed healing from every single disease. But every person who turns to Jesus is guaranteed healing where it matters the most. On a mental, emotional, soulish, spiritual, relational level. He offers us healing, wholeness. It's not just Jesus died for me so that my sins can be forgiven. That's the beginning. That's not the end. That's like a baby that's born and then left in the delivery room. No. That's the beginning of life. The rest of life is about walking into freedom, into wholeness, being loved, into loving others. We are healed by his wounds. The point is that he loved us so much and continues to love us so much that because of what Jesus did at the cross, because of what he suffered, we can be healed. We can be made whole in the bruised and broken parts of our lives, in the hurting parts of our lives. And the more that we risk trusting him, and it is a risk, the more that we risk trusting him, I would argue that the more we will get to see that he's actually worthy of trust. He is trustworthy as our wonderful counselor, as our mighty God, as our everlasting Father. And as we keep taking those steps, as we keep taking those risks, as we risk obeying him, we will experience him as our Prince of Peace. Where increasingly we release the things to him that are out of our control, but that consume us and harm us and distract us. Where we allow him to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, and where we surrender to carrying the weight of our responsibilities that are in front of us. I love how Craig Rochelle asks the question, what are you trying to control that God is inviting you to surrender? You cannot control and surrender at the same time. There are things that we have control over. There are things that we are responsible for, but the outcomes generally is going to be surrendered to God. And for some people, just this idea alone could bring an element of breakthrough. God, I'm going to be diligent with what's in my hands, but I'm going to release the outcome to you. Help me to trust you with the outcome. Help me to surrender that thing that I'm anxious over. As we trust God, as we risk, increasingly we will experience him as the Prince of Peace. Now, if you please don't miss what I'm about to say. If you forget everything else I've said today, my hope is that this will sink in. Trust is a journey. We develop trust. There could be moments of revelation. There could be moments where your faith is stirred up. But in most cases, you still wake up the next day having to manage that faith and that trust. It is earned over time. When it comes to people that you form a relationship with, maybe it's a leader at work or school. Maybe it's a pastor, because you've been let down before by a pastor or pastors or spiritual leaders or parents or siblings or best friends. The more you've been let down, the more your trust has been broken, the more of a journey it's going to take to rebuild that trust. And it's okay to want that trust to be earned, for there to be good reason to trust. It takes time. And probably nowhere did this come home for me more powerfully than in the situation with our oldest daughter, which some of you are aware of, but many others would not be. We met and developed a relationship with Micheline when she was about 13 years old, and around 16 moved in with us permanently. We committed to, we wanted to adopt her. We proposed to her. She accepted, and we did everything that we could, not perfectly, but everything that we could to try and build a relationship, to try and build that trust, to try and love her well. And I think for the most part, that was done successfully. At least I thought so. Until about a year ago, which is now after like 12, 13 years, I was having dinner with her because she lives up in Joburg. And so whenever I'm there, we try and make a plan, or Sue and I, if we're there, try and make a plan to obviously meet up. She's down with us at the moment, and she's given me permission to share the story, just so you know. Anyway, after dinner, as is normal, I would give her a hug, drop her off, tell her I love her. And in this particular occasion, she stopped and looked at me, and without even thinking about it, she said, yeah, I believe you now. I was like, wait, what? After all this time, after what we thought was, a reasonable amount of evidence and consistency, and expressing it with our words, and expressing it with actions, and with moving and creating space, and doing the things that a parent would do, it didn't offend me. It made me realize how much we can sometimes take for granted. Where so in this case, just because I love her doesn't mean that she's confident in my love. And here's what's interesting, is that I didn't love her anymore in that season where she said she believes me. I didn't love her more in the 2 years leading up to it, or the 3 years leading up to it, or the 4 years leading up to it. My love didn't change. It's just that her belief in it, her confidence in it, changed. There was enough time. There'd been enough challenges where we didn't give up. There'd been enough distance where we kept pressing in. There'd been enough, ignoring our WhatsApp messages from time to time. And I still, pressing in. Where somewhere along the line, it sunk in for her. I mean, I shouldn't use this language. And maybe this wasn't the conscious thought, but I think somewhere along the line it might have sunk in for her that I'm not just a project. Maybe they actually do love me. And it was such a powerful illustration to me of how so many people on their walk with God get discouraged because they don't feel the same level of confidence in Him, in His love, than what they think other people have. And they are discouraged by it. They can feel disillusioned by it. I think of our youngest daughter. So we have one biological daughter who's sitting in the front row here. I want to make the point that this isn't a biological, non-biological situation. I think that this is an age and experience situation. Because we fostered her from 10 weeks old until she was 8 years old, and when she was reunited with her birth mom, she had no problem trusting us, because that was her reference point. There was kind of like a consistency from early on. For Mish, no one had ever told her, no one had ever said the words, "I love you," until she was 16 years old. She'd only ever felt like somebody's problem, somebody's burden. So you can understand why psychologically it's so much easier for someone that's had that from birth to someone else that's had so much destructive, negative experiences. I'm encouraging you to be kind to yourself. I'm encouraging you to not give up on God when you feel like He's given up on you. Don't believe everything you feel. Don't believe everything you think. Just keep persevering. Keep putting the next foot in front of the next foot, taking the next step and the next step and the next step. What I have to say for Mish is that she didn't give up. She kept allowing us to build that trust. So don't expect God to overwhelm you and convince you with the parting of the Red Sea and the feeding of the 5,000 from a lunch. That's not going to happen for you. He wants to show you His faithfulness, but you are going to need to take the steps to position yourself, to allow Him to show Himself to be a wonderful counselor, a mighty God, an everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. It is a journey. What is your next step? If trusting is a journey, what is your next step? What might you need to do? How might you position yourself? Is there something that you know He's been prompting you towards that you need to obey? Is there an area to surrender? Is it a case of actually giving Him your attention? Just slowing down, just being patient, just allowing God to speak to you. If trust is a journey, what is your next step? Because I do believe that there's always a next step, regardless of where you are in your journey with Jesus. Whether you're exploring, so you're not sure what you believe and you're exploring, or whether you've been trying to follow Him for years and years and years, there's always a next step. We keep taking steps as we respond and as we try and draw closer to Him. In closing, I want to emphasize that being aware of Him is not enough. Even believing that He is who He says He is isn't enough. In fact, there's a very sobering passage in the book of Hebrews where it says that, I forget if it's Hebrews or James, forgive me, where it says that even the devil and the demons believe in Jesus. Like that's not what's going to separate us. And again, the best way that I can try and illustrate this is I've had some interesting experiences with meeting or being present with some celebrities. So some of you are too young to know who this is, but I bumped into the United States ex-president Bill Clinton many years ago. I was at a function with Beyonce and Jay-Z. You know Beyonce and Jay-Z? Okay? I'm telling the truth. I met Nelson Mandela, met Desmond Tutu. Recently, soon I had dinner with the mayor of Cape Town. Okay. But to give it proper perspective, I happened to be walking down a street in Harlem, which is sort of the northern part of Manhattan, of New York, and he just happened to be walking down because there's like a State Department there. He had this is Bill Clinton, and he had some Secret Service guys with him, which I didn't click, I didn't think about it. At the time, this was before we had cell phone cameras, and so when I registered that as him, I'm reaching into my backpack, I'm reaching for my camera, only after thinking, these guys must have wondered what I was reaching into my bag for. But they were very self-controlled. Anyway, I took the camera out to try and take a photo. That was the level of our engagement. I was at a sporting event where Beyonce and Jay-Z were. They were on the other side of the stadium. We didn't connect. Sorry. I was on a flight with one of the actors from High School Musical. Not the main guy, the second main guy. And at that stage, my girls really enjoyed High School Musical. So it was a big deal for them, I think. I was at the waterfront the one day with my much, much younger brother who was still a toddler, and Nelson Mandela was walking around with a security entourage, and they were obviously cordoning off as he was going along, and so I managed to kind of push forward with Simon, who he kind of reached out to and connected with. He had no interest in me, but he seems to like children, or did like children. And when we were still doing church at the Paddocks, met Bishop Desmond Tutu, who was at Mug and Bean at the time. Here's my point. And we were at a function with some close friends over the weekend. That's how, and the mayor's connected to them as well. Here's my point. You can say these things. You can be aware. You can be close to. You can even engage with. You can talk. You can have a conversation. It doesn't mean that I have a relationship with any of them. I've met some of these people, and others I was just in the same massive stadium or on the same airplane or whatever. Here's my challenge. You might have met Jesus, but He's inviting you to get to know Him. You might have been present to Him. You might have been at a function, at a camp, at a conference, at a church service where you're like, yeah, maybe that was God. Like, it felt different. It doesn't mean that you are developing a relationship with Him. Maybe you even had a moment where there was like a bit of an honest conversation. Maybe you prayed, God, if you're real, and fill in the blank. And that's not, my hope is not to discourage anyone. My hope is to distinguish between those awarenesses or interactions and actually making a decision to get to know. Actually making a decision to begin a relationship. Actually making a decision to persevere, and it's going to take perseverance. As you keep risking one step at a time, as you try and trust Him and then pull back a bit and take control again and try again, you keep persevering. It took Micheline 12 to 13 years to become convinced that we love her. You might need to persevere. I'm here to tell you that from my experience, He is worthy of trust. But the only way, but you can't live off of my conviction. The only way for you, regardless of where you are in your journey with God, you might be a long time Jesus follower. You might be about to make a decision to start following Him. Wherever you are, it's going to, you can't live on my conviction or on a family member or a friend's conviction. You are going to have to take the next step. That might be actually committing to reading Scripture prayerfully, saying, God, if you're real, or if you want to speak to me, please help me to understand this. To make a habit of praying. I can't encourage you enough to get connected to other people that are interested in Jesus. Not just people that say that they're a Christian or people that go to church. I mean, like, find people that are actually interested in Jesus. You'll be amazed at how you encourage one another, how iron sharpens iron. But take the next step. Do the next right thing that you know to do.